My primary purpose in this podcast is to set out some of the parameters for this package, the ways I want to think about and engage with the theme of technology, and the scope of that discussion. So I want to set out what we're talking about, but also something of the hows. In this introduction, though, I'm also going to take the liberty of sharing my personal perspective on the theme, because the whole discourse surrounding education and technology, or rather new ICT technologies, leaves me profoundly conflicted. You see, in many ways, I'm a massive nerd. I need every new gadget, and my house is full of tinkered with technologies and projects that have been my monthly fad and have since been discarded. So I love my technology, but paradoxically, I'm also a massive Luddite, particularly where that technology enters the classroom and the processes of teaching and learning. Of course, there's a contradiction here. I'm clearly not scared of technology, yet I'm a Luddite. To understand this more, let's do some social history. The term Luddite stems from the earliest part of the Industrial Revolution, and a counter-revolution of skilled artisans and craftsmen who took up militant resistance to the new automated systems of textile production, which were de-skilling and disenfranchising them, under the leadership of a fictional character called General Ludd. The movement gained entry to factories and smashed machinery, clashing violently with the mill owners, and at one point directly with the British Army. Eventually, the vandalism of looms was made a capital crime, and members of the Luddite rebellion were executed. I'm not, of course, advocating violent resistance to technology in schools here, but I do feel a strong empathy for the reasons that motivated the Luddites. Most importantly, like them, I'm cautious of the ways in which technology might mechanise and distance the learning process, and erode the hands-onness of teaching and learning, and the artisan nature of the teacher, that fundamentally interpersonal way that we interact with our raw materials, those learners we are responsible for. Of course, there's nothing given and predestined in this concern, but it pivots on what leads the process, whether technologies are foisted onto the learning process, or whether we as skilled practitioners are able to take charge of them and use them in the service of our own pedagogies. To this end, I think it's worth interrogating the rhetoric which has evolved around new technologies over the past few years, which has led to a sense that ICT, whether interactive whiteboards, computers, or mobile phones, will inherently transform the learning process. This rhetoric has been led by government policy, but also by a group of techno-evangelists who have been employed, particularly by ICT companies, including both Apple and Microsoft, to deliver insets in schools which sell the benefits of new technologies and their radical potentials. We'll meet one of those techno-evangelists during your reading in the form of Mark Prensky, and I'll ask you to critically respond to his position. In suggesting a critical interrogation of rhetoric, I don't want to suggest that new technologies are mundane and unexciting, quite the opposite in fact. I think their radical potential is very real. But the simplified portrayal only serves to obscure how it might be transformed from potential to concrete reality. Two things in particular are problematic about this rhetoric. Firstly, it tends to dwell on surface possibilities over deep pedagogic implications. Thus, it tends to showcase things we can do with technology, rather than a deeper exploration of how that really reframes the process of learning. The second problem associated with the rhetoric surrounding technology in education is that it often situates new innovations as a kind of rupture in history, that they're completely new and distinct from those ways of doing things that went before. Such a view is, I think, myopic, in that it fails to appreciate that learning has always been mediated by technology, insofar that the textbook, the pen, blackboard, and even language itself are also technologies. The net result of this, I think, are twofold. On one hand, it means that technologies are foisted onto us as teachers, with an accompanying barb, the taunt that if we don't adopt them in our practice, we must be scared of them, and of change in general. On the other hand, it means that new applications tend to recreate existing practices through a new medium. The whiteboard replaces the OHT, the wiki replaces the textbook, and nothing really radical has actually happened. Both of these tendencies are in effect adoption without integration or innovation, and they moot the revolutionary claims of the techno-evangelists. They also fail to deliver on the very real radical potentials that these technologies might have for teaching and learning. So I'm setting this session up with all that in mind, and with a sense of two core principles. Firstly, when we talk of technology here, we do it in a broad way, one which recognises the historical continuity of mediation of learning, from language and print through the pen and blackboard and into the internet age. Secondly, We will resist surface possibilities, the tips and tricks of things that you can do with different technologies. Rather, we will focus on deep significances, the way in which technologies mediate the learning process and in doing so transform it. Here, our focus is always on the pedagogic significances of the tool that we as skilled practitioners deploy, as part of our ongoing project of reasserting our professional expert status.